Coming up on New Day at Arirang, President Moon Jae-in in Rome, starting his trip to Europe. On Friday, he meets Pope Francis. After that, there's the G20 Leaders Summit and the UN's Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. South Korea remains in the grip of the fourth wave of COVID-19. Vaccinations ramping up, but the daily caseload remains stubbornly high. However, the transition to living with COVID will still start from next month. Plus, at the American Music Awards, BTS are nominated for Artist of the Year, Favorite Pop Duo or Group, and Favorite Pop Song for their smash hit single Butter. The winners will be announced on November 21st.
Hello and happy Friday. I'm Kim Mo-gan and it's October 29th here in Seoul, South Korea. Welcome to New Day at Arirang.
I'm Mark Broom and we do have a packed show for you to see out the work week. Over the next hour, we are going to take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on issues facing Korea and the world.
And we start with the latest on the coronavirus situation in South Korea. The country is seeing daily cases hover above the 2,000 mark once again. Amid soaring cases, health authorities are set to announce their final details of their step-by-step recovery plan.
Now, for more on this and other COVID-19 related updates, joining us one last time this week is our reporter, Chair Min-jung. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
So let's start with the daily forecast for Friday. On Thursday, we saw cases top 2,000. I think it was the first time in around 3 weeks that happened. What's the estimate for today?
Right, the figure for Friday is likely to stay above the 2,000 mark once again. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Thursday, officials confirmed 1,930 cases. Compared to the same day last week, this is up by more than 560 cases. Officials say the recent spike is mostly due to people becoming more complacent in regards to prevention measures, as limits on social gatherings were partially eased last Monday. Authorities remain on high alert as the country is witnessing a growing uptick right before the nation kicks off its Living with COVID scheme.
Right, Min-jung, and we're just a matter of days before the beginning of the first step of the shift on Living with COVID-19 scheme. I heard the final details are going to be released today.
Right, the government will announce the finalized scheme on Friday. Earlier this week, officials announced the blueprint, and what we know so far is that most businesses will now be able to operate 24 hours a day, but with the exception of bars, clubs, and other nightlife entertainment facilities. Another thing we know is that limits on social gatherings will be lifted, so a maximum of 10 people can gather, regardless of the number of people vaccinated. However, there are disputes over the number of unvaccinated people allowed in restaurants and cafes. Officials are currently planning on limiting the number to 4, but business owners have complained that this number is too small, while experts believe it should be reduced further to 2. Vaccine passes will also be required for people entering facilities deemed high risk, like bars, fitness centers, and singing rooms. Those who aren't vaccinated will need a negative PCR test taken 2 days before going to the venues. Officials also clarified that the vaccine passes will be valid as long as people satisfy basic requirements. In other words, people won't need a booster shot to get a pass. So the government is set to announce more details on these measures and address any adjustments if made in today's announcement.
Also in today's announcement, as a parent myself, I can speak firsthand about the upheaval it's been in many parents' lives here in South Korea with the COVID-19 situation being what it is with online learning and whatnot. But I hear we're going to hear more details about what's going to be happening with schools going forward today as well.
Right. The Ministry of Education will be announcing plans on a gradual return to normal life for schools. They are expected to expand school attendance for students in the capital area and discuss when to normalize classes that involve group discussions and activities. Currently, only 2/3 of elementary and middle schoolers in the capital area can attend in-person classes, while there are no restrictions outside the region. Still, officials are being extra cautious with their decision as many younger students have not yet been vaccinated. This being said, infections have begun to increase as daily cases among teenagers set new highs this week.
Right. Regardless of age, we can't deny that everyone wants to go back to our life before the pandemic. But I'm hearing South Korea is still concerned about a possible uptick in cases after the restrictions have been eased.
Right, so health experts are saying that the number of new infections can soar up to 20,000 a day once the country transitions to living with COVID-19. The Korean Medical Association says South Korea may have to face a fifth wave of the pandemic with restrictions further eased. They also added that the cold winter season is another cause for a potential spike. While acknowledging the need for a step-by-step recovery, experts emphasize that officials should focus on preventing the meltdown of the medical system as well. In case of such an emergency, or when more than 80% of hospital beds are occupied, officials say they will consider halting the restrictions temporarily to enforce an emergency plan.
All right. Thank you, Min Jung, for your report. I'll talk to you again in our later newscast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Min Jung, as always, for your reporting. Now, moving on, South Korea has now vaccinated more than 70% of its population against COVID-19. That is fully vaccinated. On Thursday, authorities laid out their plans for November, with more priority groups becoming eligible for booster shots.
These are for people in their 50s, those who originally got the Janssen vaccine, and certain priority workers. Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
South Korean health authorities have expanded their eligibility list for COVID-19 booster shots.
Considering the risk of infection, developing serious symptoms, death, and breakthrough infections, additional vaccinations will be expanded to those in their 50s, those with underlying diseases, Janssen recipients, and priority occupational groups.
Booster shots mean a third shot 6 to 8 months after the second dose for an mRNA vaccine, and for Janssen's one-and-done type, a second short 2 months after the first. The newly included people will be able to sign up for the shots on November 1st, and the rollout will begin on the 15th. That's another 2 million more people. The over 50s have been added as the fatality rate starts going up significantly, starting among those in this age group. People with certain underlying illnesses would include those with diabetes, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic renal failure, chronic hepatitis B, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. For Janssen's vaccine recipients, there have been a high number of breakthrough infections, so the authorities have included them to prevent any more. The authorities also said on Thursday that according to recent data, those who are unvaccinated are 9.4 times more likely to die from COVID-19, while the spread of the Delta variant has lowered the effectiveness of the vaccines to around 60%.
Prevention of critical cases and death is above 90%. To prevent people from becoming critically ill or dying, getting vaccinated is what's most important.
The U.S. is also looking to expand its vaccine rollout, with the country's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updating its guidelines to recommend a fourth shot to moderately or severely immunocompromised people. The agency recommended the shot to come 6 months after the third shot. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in is in Rome for this year's G20 summit, which will be held over the weekend. Ahead of the global gathering, he will sit down for talks with Pope Francis at the Vatican on Friday. During those talks, he's expected to ask for the Pope's support for the long-stalled peace process on the Korean peninsula. Our senior Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji, who's traveling with the president, follows us this report.
Closely watched on President Moon Jae-in's itinerary is his meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican on Friday, their first sit-down in 3 years. President Moon arrived in Rome on Thursday afternoon, the opening round of his trip to Europe, for the G20 summit and the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. The Blue House says President Moon is expected to ask for the pontiff's continued support for peace on the Korean peninsula, and could also discuss a potential papal visit to North Korea. He will also hold talks with Vatican Secretary of State Pietro Parolin. Pope Francis, who has made appeals for inter-Korean rapprochement many times, has previously expressed willingness to consider such a trip. In 2018, when President Moon delivered a verbal message from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un inviting him to visit, the Pope said he would, if there is an official invitation. However, the visit never materialized due to a stalled peace process on the Korean peninsula, following the abrupt breakdown of the second North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi in 2019. President Moon says he'll make efforts until the end of his term in May 2022 for a new order of peace and prosperity on the peninsula through dialogue and diplomacy. Recently, he has been pushing for a symbolic declaration to end the 1950-53 Korean War. South Korea's Unification Ministry, which handles inter-Korean affairs, will be holding an exhibition in the Italian capital this week in conjunction with the president's trip, highlighting Seoul's efforts for peace. Through his meeting with the Pope, President Moon is expected to make another shot to try and resuscitate the Korean Peninsula peace process. Adding to those hopes, Pope Francis will also be sitting down for talks with U.S. President Joe Biden on the same day, where North Korea may also be discussed. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Rome.
Ahead of their summit this weekend, the leaders of the G20 economies have largely agreed on the need to take urgent action to tackle what they call the existential challenge of climate change. Kim Hyo-san tells us more.
G20 leaders who are scheduled to meet in Rome for a two-day summit beginning Saturday have reportedly agreed to take, quote, immediate action to maintain the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. According to an 11-page draft statement seen by Reuters, the leaders share the view that they would stop funding foreign coal-fired plants. On domestic coal, the draft includes leaders' pledges to do their utmost to avoid building new unabated coal power generation capacity, taking their own national circumstances into account. They also acknowledge the relevance of achieving global net zero greenhouse gas emissions or carbon neutrality going forward. The statement also says they will reduce global methane emissions by at least 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. The leaders agreed also on achieving an annual $100 billion target for climate financing for developing countries, but the details have yet to be detailed. The statement is seen as a key stepping stone ahead of a broader UN climate summit next week in Glasgow. While the leaders of the G20 economies agreed on what they describe the, quote, existential challenge of climate change, some areas remain points of contention. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
More prestigious awards could be coming BTS's way. The K-pop group have been nominated for 3 American Music Awards. It includes Artist of the Year, making them the first Asian artists to be nominated in the most sought-after category. Jang Tae-hyun with the details.
BTS has set a new global music industry record by becoming the first Asian artist to be nominated Artist of the Year at the American Music Awards. They'll be competing with pop artists such as Ariana Grande, Drake, and Taylor Swift. BTS were nominated in a total of 3 categories at the 2021 American Music Awards. Aside from Artist of the Year, the others include Favorite Pop Duo or Group, and Butter was nominated for Favorite Pop Song. The nominees were selected based on factors, including streaming and album sales. The AMA will be broadcasted in Los Angeles on November 21st. In the meantime, the People's Choice Awards revealed its nominations for its upcoming ceremony. The nominees will be determined through votes by the general public. BTS have scored 4 nominations in 3 categories. With their song Butter, they're in the running for the Group of 2021 and the Song of 2021. 2 songs, Butter and My Universe, were nominated for the music video of 2021. TXT has been nominated for the New Artist of 2021, and Squid Game has been nominated for the Binge-worthy show of 2021. Voting is open on their official website until November 17th, and the event will be aired on December 7th. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. It's Friday, so that means we are talking about entertainment. And the focus this week is OTT. It stands for over the top, but perhaps not as you most commonly know or use it in your everyday conversations, if you are one of those people that uses it. The over the top here refers to streaming content to customers directly over the web or through other smart devices such as your TV, tablet or phone. For many people, it does represent the future of entertainment and a field that is rapidly evolving evolving through services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus, to name just a few.
Yes, and in fact, monthly active users of Netflix in South Korea are in the order of several million people, and the number is increasing. So we wanted to dig deeper into why the format is proving increasingly more appealing to consumers than traditional alternatives like, going to the cinema, watching cable TV, or buying a DVD set for their favorite series. Now for this, we turn to our Jason Bejervais, a Seoul-based film critic and a familiar face to many of you who regularly tune into Arirang TV. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Mogyeong. Good morning, Mark.
Thank you.
Now, Jason, let's get straight to the crux of it. Why are streaming platforms like Netflix exploding in popularity, not only in Korea, but around the world?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think people are growing tired of the studio tentpoles. Of course, the Marvel films are popular, but the studios have long been reliant on franchises and sequels, and streamers such as Netflix, they've been more ambitious and bold in the way they approach their content. They're also financing a lot of non-English language content. And I think, audiences are really responding to that. And I think many of the changes that we're seeing in the so-called, the ecosystem, I think have been accelerated during the COVID pandemic. So there are more people at home. And certainly in the United States, there are signs that even before COVID, that more and more people were watching films at home, especially young families. And so, the streamers, most notably Netflix, but also, Amazon Prime, we're seeing other kind of big players coming into the system now. They've really kind of exploited this marketplace. And I think it's reminiscent in a sense of some of the changes that happened in the 60s and 70s when people were watching television shows at home.
Now, a growing number of people, especially the younger generation, just default to streaming or YouTube over cable TV or similar options available to them. Do you think these OTT streaming services are going to eventually wash away cable TV? And if so, how quickly do you think this is all going to unfold?
No, I don't think they're going to wash away. I think they're going to coexist. It's difficult to predict exactly what will happen. It's all very uncertain. But certainly in Korea, if you look at some of the big kind of cable channels, you've got TVN, you've got JTBC, and they're owned by big companies, and they're positioning themselves very, very strategically at the moment. You've got JTBC that's owned by the Jungang Group. You've got TVN, which is owned by CJ. And they're financing a lot of Korean content. You've got Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha. You've got Sky Castle. These are enormously popular shows in Korea. Koreans still watch a lot of their content through cable and terrestrial channels. And sure enough, in terms of the viewership, the terrestrial channels are seeing a gradual decline. But that has been evident for a number of years owing to the cable channels. Certainly Netflix and the other streamers that are entering the system, certainly they're changing things, and we're going to see streaming wars kind of hit full gear over the next few months and few years. But I do think ultimately they will coexist, but there will be some kind of consolidation. And Netflix, in terms of the content they're financing, it's very, very expensive. And so it's going to be difficult for the smaller players to be able to compete.
Now, like you just said, Jason, there's no denying the future of OTT is extremely bright. And you only need to look at the global success of Squid Game on Netflix to prove that point. And even looking back just 2 to 3 years, the Netflix back then is unrecognizable to what it is now, both in terms of quality and breadth of its content. Now, given that it's moving so rapidly, what do you imagine OTT services might be like in the next 5 years?
Well, it's interesting. I think about Okja sometimes, and certainly the reception to that. You remember in Cannes in 2017, and here in Korea, the multiplexes refused to screen the film because of this so-called 3-week window between its release in theaters and online. The conglomerates or the chaebols, the multiplexes are up in arms about that. And yet here we are a few years later, and it's a completely different ecosystem. And so trying to predict what's going to happen over the next few years is going to be difficult. But I think with Netflix coming in, we're seeing Netflix are here now. But there are also drawbacks with Netflix. And I think the success of Squid Game, I think it's an amazing success of the Korean culture industry. But also the thing is with Netflix is they own the IP. And so that's a warning, I think, for Korean directors and those who want to produce this incredible content that's very, very popular. And so I think there's an opportunity here for the local players to be able to exploit that. So Netflix does have its global reach. It does have huge pockets. But I think there is potential there for the local streamers, the local content providers to be able to compete with Netflix in providing some of these filmmakers with allowing them to have IP. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Okja because now there's a big controversy about the movie June and the fact that in the United States, HBO Plus was streaming that as it was in US cinemas. So we're seeing more and more of this kind of infighting between the studios and these streaming giants. But finally, we just want to quickly finish on another huge giant is preparing to wade into the South Korean market. Disney Plus going to start here mid-November. The company says it will cost around $8 to $9 a month to subscribe. Now, despite Disney offering all this content, they've got Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars and other brands, do you think it's going to be enough to turn Koreans' heads away from Netflix? Or do you think it's mainly going to attract that overflow of people who can afford the luxury of being able to subscribe to both, or those parents who have kids and the kids insist that they have Disney Plus and Netflix?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, Disney obviously have, they are a big draw. They were the best performing studio in Korea in 2019. Into films such as The Avengers and Aladdin, and their library isn't really impressive. So, I mean, looking at their lineup though over the next few years, it seems like they're focusing. They're certainly focusing on Korea, but I think also Asia as a whole. It seems to be a different approach to Netflix in that Netflix, I think, are financing Korean content, but I think they're keen to export it to not only Asia but across the world. And so, me personally, I was less kind of enthusiastic about Disney Plus's lineup, but certainly they do have a big catalog, and we'll have to see what happens going forward. And I think what perhaps might happen is, we'll see some people who just turn over to Disney, whereas other people may choose to subscribe to both services. But ultimately, we're going to see a lot of services coming into Korea. We've got Apple as well, Apple TV Plus, which is coming in just, I think, next week with very little warning. So yes, it's going to be a very interesting time for the Korean film industry.
Okay, well, we'll have to look forward to it. Now, Jason, always good to get you on, and we're glad you could join us. Now, that was Seoul-based film critic Jason Bejervaise on the rise of streaming services. Thank you, Jason. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. A closed-door National Assembly audit was held in Seoul Thursday with officials from South Korea's intelligence agency.
And most of the discussion is squarely on North Korea, as this is one of the rare cases where intel officers are able to talk freely about what's happening inside the regime. Kim Sang-min reports.
During the parliamentary audit for South Korea's National Intelligence Service on Thursday, questions were asked about recent speculation on North Korea. According to lawmakers who attended the audit, NIS officials had informed the Intelligence Committee of the possibility that North Korea is reactivating its main nuclear reactor in Yongbyon. Specifically, the speculation is centered around the possibility that the regime is reprocessing the spent fuel rod, a process known as harvesting plutonium. One expert says this is crucial because it is part of North Korea's efforts to maximize its nuclear capabilities, including the launch of a hypersonic missile last month.
Yeah, I think they are preparing for another round of this. I don't know exactly what kind of their intention, but it seems to me that they are going to have the talk with the United States sometime in next year. And before that, North Korea is trying to maximize their leverage over the United States.
Attention was also drawn to the reports that the term Kim Jong-unism has been used in North Korea. The NIS said the North Korean leader has begun to formulate his own system of thought, citing the removal of portraits of his predecessors Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il from the conference hall. The expert noted that it's a move that has never been seen before, although it's too early to say whether it will be something permanent.
And this is going to be a very fundamental change of this regime's legitimacy. So I don't think it's a little bit earlier that the Kim Jong-un brought his own ism at this moment. So we have to wait and see.
He added that since North Korea is heavily dependent on Kim Il-sungism, even if the current leader wants to develop his own ideology, it will be difficult to separate it from the current system. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Business sentiment among South Korean firms edged up this month due to eased social distancing measures and rapid vaccine rollouts. The Bank of Korea said Friday that the business sentiment index for all industries in October was 86, up 2 points on month. Despite the uptick, the figure remains under 100, indicating there are more pessimists than optimists about the economy. By sector, BSI among manufacturers stayed at 90. Sentiment among non-manufacturing businesses rose 5 points to 84, thanks to improvements in the wholesale and retail sector, as well as the construction industry. The World Health Organization and other aid groups have appealed to the G20 to fund a $23.4 billion plan to ensure poorer nations can get COVID-19 vaccines, tests and drugs in 2022. The strategy, dubbed Act A, will include the use of an experimental oral antiviral drug for treating mild to moderate cases. The request comes as 82 countries are likely to miss the WHO's global target of 40% vaccination coverage by the end of this year. The European Central Bank is holding its interest rates and monetary policy steady despite inflationary pressures. The head of the bank, Christine Lagarde, said Thursday that the ECB foresees midterm inflation remaining below its target. She reiterated that the ECB's interest rates are expected to remain the same or could go even lower until inflation reaches the target of 2%. The bank also renewed its pledge to carry out COVID-19 emergency bond buying at a moderately slower pace through early next year.
Welcome to Dialogue This Week. In this corner, we invite guests from in and out of Korea to talk about a wide variety of issues ranging from culture and sports to the latest trends around the world. Now, this week, we will talk about a topic that needs the attention of every single one of us. A topic we face every day, but sometimes tend to forget about its importance. Today, we will talk about ways to stop climate change, possibly stop climate change and preserve our environment, especially as the 26th UN Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26, is set to kick off next week. It's a crucial time for the world to be reminded of the seriousness of the situation and make significant pledges that could make a difference. Now, for more in-depth discussion on this, we are joined by Sophia Kiani, founder and executive director at Climate Cardinals, an international youth-led nonprofit organization working to make the climate movement more accessible to non-English speakers by making the information available in over 100 languages. Hello, Sophia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
And also joining us is Justine Holmes, researcher at Solutions for Climate, a Korea-based nonprofit organization established in 2016, advocating stronger climate and air policies via Skype. Justine, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here today.
Now, let's start a discussion with Sophia. As much as a global concern climate change is, it can also be a personal mission. You are a climate activist, a young founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals. First, I must ask, what prompted you to take such action?
I was really inspired to become a climate activist and to start my nonprofit Climate Cardinals after visiting Iran, which is my parents' home country. When I went to Iran, I was struck by how horrible air pollution was. I know air pollution is a huge concern in Korea as well. And I also learned that in the Middle East, temperatures were rising more than twice the global average. But what scared me the most was the fact that my relatives knew almost nothing about climate change. And so I decided to start translating climate resources into Farsi to teach my relatives in Iran about climate change, which is what inspired me starting Climate Cardinals, because I think it's critical for non-English speakers to have access to the critical climate resources that they need. But most scientific literature is actually only available in English.
Well, that is certainly very meaningful. But like I've mentioned, Climate Cardinals is an international organization, and those involved in leading the action are mostly young, like you've just said. There must be some advantages, but also some challenges you're facing there that you can share with us?
Definitely. So the average age of a Climate Cardinals or volunteer is only 16 years old, which is pretty young. And so I think one of the biggest issues that we've seen is that sometimes we need to reach out to adults or professional translators for help in translating these resources into different languages, especially as we target the Middle East and Asia. So translating into Farsi, into Korean, into Chinese. And so I think that it's really important to have intergenerational dialogue and work, especially as we are approaching COP.
Okay, now let's also turn over to Justin. What about you? What moved you to become a researcher in climate performance, and what role does Solution for Our Climate play?
Yes, I have been working on climate performance. We just launched the Climate Transparency Report 21, which compares G20 countries on climate performance. It's been a really exciting project to be involved in. Obviously in the run-up to G20 and the COP, really important and exciting work. SFOC has been the Korean partner leading the project this year. On a personal level, my motivation has really become in the last few recent years, becoming a mother, and living in Hong Kong for 4 years, and now in Seoul, where, of course, there are, as Sophia mentioned, serious air pollution issues. And I just think of these air pollution going into my children's lungs. We have we had in Hong Kong non-pollution days at school where the schools were closed, and I had friends with kids suffering from exacerbated asthma from the air pollution. So all this together really propelled me back into working in the climate space. In terms of the role of SFOC, their vision is one of a fossil-free society, and they work through research, advocacy, and litigation in order to mitigate the effects of climate change, and their most recent research has been around the status of fossil fuel subsidies, the climate performance of South Korea, but also looking at the policies and implementation that is needed beyond the target.
You just also mentioned that you've been living in Korea. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but you would have. Over the recent years, South Korea has become more environmentally conscious. But how do you see the day-to-day habits of people when it comes to climate action and overall environmental awareness?
Yes, I agree. Korea is environmentally conscious. A recent Gallup poll has showed that out of 34 countries, Korea has one of the highest perceptions of climate change in terms of being a threat to humanity. And that has been played out in the recent declarations of climate emergencies in around 226 of the provinces around Korea. And also extreme weather events such as the floods in Seoul last year do have an impact on that awareness. However, I also agree that in terms of individual actions, this doesn't necessarily translate into action, this growing awareness. I think with climate change being a big global issue, it's very difficult for people to know how they should respond at an individual level. And I think here is where we need governments and corporations to really step in to meet the challenge of the climate crisis, which really does require systemic change. I think in South Korea as well, there is a very unique situation where you have government and very few large corporations who have a great influence over the economy and are also responsible for many of the emissions. And I think here is also an opportunity for Korea to move quickly on climate change and have governments and corporations lead public opinion and drive behavioral change by putting in place incentives for renewable energy, by committing to 100% renewable energy policies, and really leading the way for the Korean public.
Yes, I do agree that, powerful organizations and companies and governments should also step in to bring forth more concrete measures. Sophia, like we've just touched upon, one of the things that Climate Cardinals does is encouraging more environmentally friendly habits beyond borders and regardless of language barriers. But you mentioned shortly about Korea. How is Climate Cardinals' involvement in South Korea?
So one of the things that Climate Cardinals has realized is that I also work with the UN on their youth advisory group on climate change. And so the UN languages are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. And these languages that account for less than half of the world's speaking population, meaning that the majority of people on our planet are unable to understand these documents and agreements that are being issued by one of the most highest international political bodies. And as you can see, that those languages don't include Korean, but Korean is one of the languages that Climate Cardinals translates into, because we do think that it's critical for all people to be able to access climate resources, especially as we were talking about earlier, being able to access resources about what I can personally do or what you personally can do when it comes to taking climate action. But I do agree that systemic action is the largest thing that we need to be focused on. And I know that South Korea's ruling party has recently agreed to increasing the nationally determined contribution to a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions since 2017 levels. But I know that a number of U.S. politicians, including John Kerry and Al Gore, have said that that's not sufficient and it needs to be raised to 50%.
All right. And going back to Justine, an average individual living in South Korea might think we're very environmentally conscious. Our recycling and waste system forces us to rethink about the things we're throwing out. And also, grocery stores and even convenience stores don't just give out plastic bags anymore. But do you think these regulations are enough or even still effective? And what would you want to see changed?
Yes, I mean, I'll answer this on a personal level because it's not something that SFOC works on directly, but I'd heard about South Korea's recycling system before I arrived last year in South Korea. But when I arrived, I really noticed that okay, the recycling system is great, but the volume of recycling that gets put through that system is really huge, from the sort of plastic packaging around deliveries to what you receive from cafes, restaurant chains, and in supermarkets around the groceries. I think that is the sort of recycling is really the last resort. So I think, addressing the waste higher up the chain is very important. So I think, again, it really points towards the sort of large corporations such as the big supermarkets and the delivery companies such as Coupang and food and restaurant chains, convenience stores such as GS25, 7-Eleven, really pledging to go plastic free and taking on board plastic free policies within the next decade.
Mm-hmm. And again, Sophia, as world leaders gather in Glasgow next week for COP26, they will once again make efforts to declare bigger plans to cut emissions. They may also tighten guidelines set in the Paris rulebook. But exactly how do we bridge the gap between world leaders making these pledges and individuals making changes to their daily lives?
Well, I actually co-chaired the Youth for Climate conference in Milan, Italy, just a few weeks ago. And one of the things we did is we created these 4 outcome documents. Young people, over 400 young people from over 100 countries, we all came together and we created these 4 outcome documents with policy proposals for world leaders to adopt. And so I'm going to be going to COP26 next week. And this is one of the documents that we're going to be discussing with environmental ministers. And I think that that is one of the ways that in which we can bridge the gap between young people, between the ordinary citizens, and between our governmental leaders, just so that we are having this dialogue and we're really clearly communicating what is it that we want to see as far as climate action goes, and what can our world leaders do to better represent our concerns.
And Justine, attending the COP26 is part of President Moon Jae-in's 9-day trip to Europe. And last year, the president pledged to go carbon neutral by 2050 and even vowed to raise South Korea's emission reduction goal to 40% of 2018 levels by 2030. Now, that's significantly higher than the previous 26.3%. In order to achieve this goal as a nation, what moves have we made in the right direction, and what changes do we still need to make to ultimately reduce our carbon emissions?
Yes, you're right. The ambition has been raised in the most recent target that's been put forward by the South Korean government. Unfortunately, as was previously mentioned, it's not quite enough to be aligned with the 1.5-degree pathway that's required. And it should be around 59% below 2017 levels by 2030 in order to achieve a 1.5-degree pathway by 2030. So I think really the key moment for South Korea is going to be following COP, where the ambition needs to be translated into real policies and action on the ground. For SFOC, this means, and many groups in South Korea, this also means moving forward with a full decarbonisation of the energy sector, which cuts across the power, industry and transport sectors. And specifically, this means more aggressively reducing and phasing out coal. South Korea has, of course, committed to stop the financing of coal overseas, but domestically, it's continuing with building 4 units in South Korea, which will make it very difficult for South Korea to meet its current climate targets. COP is the COP that's going to consign coal to history. So we would like to see South Korea be among those international partners who are pushing for coal phase out that aligns with the holding temperatures to 1.5 degrees. And I think some of the provinces in Korea have already joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance, for example. South Korea could be one of the first national Asian members of that alliance to really show leadership on this issue. Some other key actions on the path towards 2050 carbon neutrality would be phasing out fossil fuel subsidies for coal, oil and gas, and also moving towards the implementation of key policies in the energy sector. I think that Koreans, may experience some short-term inconvenience in terms of electricity price increase, but I think that would be embraced by the Korean public if they could see the benefits of moving to a low-carbon future, of the inflow of investment, of the increased quality of life, health and environmental quality of life. I think that could be a real benefit for the Korean public, and perhaps it could even be the next Korean wave.
I also hope so too, for us to reach our goal through the combined efforts. Now, thank you. I'm afraid we will have to wrap up our discussion at this point. Thank you so much, Sophia and Justine, for your insights. Hope to speak to you again soon.
Bye. Thank you.
The Seoul City government and the Financial Supervisory Service held a conference Thursday to present their goal of making the South Korean capital one of the world's top global financial centres. At the event, a Nobel Prize-winning economist emphasised what Seoul should do to achieve that goal. Ji-young reports.
Seoul will become a top 5 global financial hub by 2030. This is the goal of an ambitious plan presented at the Seoul International Finance Conference on Thursday, where officials from financial circles gathered to seek ways for a new leap forward. Seoul has jumped from 36th in 2019 to 13th this year in the Global Finance Centers Index. And it ranks 11th for competitiveness in the fintech field. The mayor of Seoul, Oh Se-hoon, announced his plan for the city's financial transformation.
We plan to develop Yeouido as a digital finance special zone and plan to make Seoul the digital financial hub of Asia. In order to become the world's top fintech hub, we're expanding fintech labs, which will serve as the country's largest platform to accelerate the growth of digital finance.
The governor of the Financial Supervisory Service also announced how the financial watchdog will support Seoul's growth as a global financial hub.
We will support digital innovation in the finance sector. Also, through active communication, we will continuously improve regulations to foster innovation of financial and fintech firms.
At the conference, Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz shared his views on financial regulations and the challenges in building a vibrant financial hub.
So any city, any place aspiring to be a global financial hub today has to have regulations that ensure transparency. And this is a response to demands by ordinary citizens, but also demands by financial regulators in other countries. So I think that is the direction in which Seoul has been going and should continue to go.
He added that transparency and well-designed regulations will lead to innovations that add value for society. He also discussed some of the non-financial problems that Seoul should resolve to move forward.
Finance occupies buildings that are just like residential buildings. And so one can have more integration of residences with production. Why is that important? Well, it reduces the time spent in transportation, which in a mega city like Seoul can be very large.
Stiglitz also emphasized that it is important to redesign our cities where we have more shared experiences across all groups. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin on Thursday warned that Taiwan's independence is doomed to a dead end, saying that no country nor person should underestimate the will of the Chinese people to defend their national sovereignty.
Those who forget their heritage, betray their motherland, and seek to split the country will come to no good end. Seeking Taiwan independence leads to a dead end, so does supporting Taiwan independence.
Wang made the remarks at a press conference in Beijing in response to Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen's recent interview in which she confirmed for the first time that a small number of U.S. forces are on the island to train with local soldiers. The spokesperson slammed the military actions and called for the U.S. to halt its interference in China's internal affairs.
We firmly oppose official and military ties in any form between the U.S. and the Taiwan region and oppose the U.S. interference in China's internal affairs.
He added that the cross-strait reunification is an overriding historical trend and the right course. Facebook on Thursday announced it would rebrand its company as Meta, a name change that shows its ambition to refocus the world's largest social media platform toward building the metaverse. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg at the company's live-streamed virtual and augmented reality conference stressed that the new brand name reflected its focus on building a new virtual realm rather than its namesake social media service.
From now on, we're going to be metaverse first, not Facebook first. That means that over time, you won't need to use Facebook to use our other services. And as our new brand starts showing up in our products, I hope that people come to know the Meta brand and the future that we stand for.
The company also unveiled a new sign at its headquarters, replacing its thumbs-up-like logo with a blue infinity shape. Meta will also begin trading under a new stock ticker, MVRS, starting December 1st. Protesters took to the streets of Glasgow on Thursday, calling on world leaders to go beyond words and make a meaningful commitment to keep the world within a 1.5 degrees temperature increase threshold.
We are in a full-blown climate crisis. World leaders know this. They've seen what's happening. Now's the time for them to come together here in Glasgow and hammer out a deal to avert the worst of the climate catastrophe.
The protests come as government leaders are set to convene in Glasgow next week to meet this year's deadline to commit to a more ambitious emissions cut pledge. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Korea is going through the finest time of the year with autumn leaves under sunny skies. Well, today there will be a few more clouds than yesterday in many parts, but it will be fairly nice with highs hovering a couple of degrees higher than season norms. Morning fog has built up in many inland regions, but they should burn off as the morning goes on, while the air quality will be normal to good nationwide, so it should be another fine day for an afternoon walk. Low temperatures are 2 to 4 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Busan and Jeju much warmer in the double digits this morning, but elsewhere we'll notice highs jumping more than 10 degrees by the afternoon, as afternoon readings will be similar to yesterday, hovering around 20 degrees. Gwangju and Jeju at 21 degrees this afternoon. Well, this weekend should not be as fine as the last week with rain in the forecast on Jeju and parts of central areas. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for this Friday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Kim Mo-gyan and his Mark Broom. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, we look forward to the weekend. Both Mo-gyan and I will be back with New Day at Arirang on Monday at 8 a.m. Korea time. Our next newscast coming up in just under about an hour from now. But in the meantime, stay tuned to Arirang TV. Goodbye.